Hello and welcome to this omnibus edition of Happy Times and Places. This is me, Toby Haydock, doing a positive episode commentary on a story chosen by a friend of mine. I have to comment, make observations, and see if I can guess my friend's favourite things about the story in question.
Hello, Toby. My name is James Goss, and I write things for Big Finish. I write target novels, and, well, that's what I do. And you've asked me to nominate a story, and I'm nominating For to Doomsday because nobody else will, because they're all wrong, because For to Doomsday is For to Doomsday. And I hope you're about to enjoy For to Doomsday as much as it's given me pleasure over many, many years since I first saw it.
Well, hello everybody. Toby Haydock here. I'm sitting on an ever-decreasing sofa. I really need a new sofa. This one is collapsing under my weight. I mean, I'm not making aspirations to my own girth, although I could do with losing a few pounds. As I record this, I've finished off the excess of consumables left over from the Christmas period. However, that is not going to diminish my enjoyment of this process, although we are going to be watching For to Doomsday, as James Goss told you there, which I think is quite an odd fish, and I'm not sure what my opinion of it is. I want to love it, because I think my impression of it is that it has a certain offbeat strangeness about it, but then I'm reminded of some of its perhaps less, shall we say, competent moments. But let's see. I'm not... Anyway, let's not... I've got 4 episodes to get through. I shall perhaps reserve some of this comment for when we're talking along some of the scenes where people are wandering around a spaceship a lot or watching some dancing. I'm delighted that my companion for this is James Goss, who is a delightful fellow. I would urge you to seek out his work, although I'm sure you have. If your Doctor Who consumption has got to the point where you're sort of scouring through the dregs of what's left available that you haven't experienced, which is why you're doing this. The wine of Who is drawn, and the mere lees is left this vault to brag of, and the lees being the sediment at the bottom of the barrel is a comedian watching a not very well known Peter Davison story. But James Goss is an illustrious guest. I don't know him very well. We have socialised on occasion, and he's helped me out with a couple of contacts and things on occasion. But I like him. I don't want to embarrass him. I like his energy. I like his sense of humour. I think of it as waspish, and then you spend some time in his company. It's not. It's actually very charming. He's not catty, but he's amusing and he's quick. And I love his writing. I love the sense of humour that leaps. So I remember did he do a production notes, or he stood in for a column in Doctor Who magazine one month. I think it was a production notes. I remember being terribly disappointed that it wasn't Russell T Davies doing it, and then went, "Oh my God, this guy's really funny. He can really write." And then, of course, I realised that he wrote lots of other things, and I've had the pleasure of enjoying a lot of his work and a bit of his company. So I'm thrilled that he's doing the podcast, and I'm sort of even more thrilled that he's doing For to Doomsday, because, yeah, I'd have fun with James Goss watching Caves of Androzani, but I somehow think I'll have more fun with James Goss watching For to Doomsday. So with that in mind, I have my BritBox fired up, and I am going to press... I do have it on... Should I be watching the Blu-ray? No, well, too late now. This is easier for me. So I am going to press watch from the beginning on episode 1 of For to Doomsday. Thank you for joining me. Let's go into space. And I'm going to press select in 3, 2, 1. So here we are. This is the first story that Peter Davison recorded, isn't it? This is his debut as Doctor Who, because he'd been given a few stories to bed in before recording Castrovalva, which is, I think, about 4th, which is a kind of smart idea. So his debut performance is sort of snuck under the radar. I remember being terribly excited at the title 4 to Doomsday, because I was not a fan of the single word Christopher H. Bidmead story titles. I know a lot of people love them because they're vague and intriguing, but I wanted Terror of the Somethings, Attack of the Somethings. Doomsday is a great word. Doomsday Weapon, of course, was the title of not a Doctor Who story that was actually called Colony in Space, but I had the book and it was the Doomsday Weapon, which I love as a title. I love the word Doomsday. Oh, and there's a modern Doomsday. Doomsday is a good word. This is an excellent opening shot, and I love this piece of music that was on an album that I had. But that's a really nice, they're sort of going for the big spaceship flying overhead that Star Wars does, and it's not quite the same, but it's a reasonable approximation. And the blue screen, I'm assuming that's sort of, you can see slight bit of fringing, but it's above average. I think that's an elegant opening. I actually like this elegant pace. The TARDIS landing, we see we have the spaceship, we have the quiet, wherever it is that the TARDIS lands. This I find a bit odd, though. I remember this, where we start with totally redundant action just to give everybody something to do. So Adric tells Nyssa to go somewhere. She doesn't go anywhere. She doesn't need to go anywhere because the other two people are in. So that's a bit of business that's wasted everybody's time. But of course, it's quite a crowded TARDIS. The design in this story is excellent, as is actually the lighting. You can see why sort of Andrew Cartmel, when he came in, decided to get rid of sort of scenes where people chat in the TARDIS. But actually, I remember not minding them at the time because it was sort of it was life on the TARDIS. It seemed to me an organic part of the show that you'd have the beginning in the TARDIS and you'd have the coda in the TARDIS, where and there was sometimes a bit of business or a joke or something that sort of bookended the story, and that felt sort of kind of comfortable. But now we've got no time for that in the modern world, and I can understand that development, and there's not an awful lot that thrills me about these scenes, but I don't dislike them. I think this is nice. The attempt to go, okay, well, we're not necessarily going to be able to breathe when we go outside. You can't do that with every single Doctor Who story. It's more likely that if you land in alien environments, you're always going to have a problem as a human or as a Time Lord or whatever, somebody with our sort of biological makeup, that the atmosphere, every story would stop dead in its tracks if it was like, well, before we go outside, we've got to do all sorts of things and put on all sorts of gear. But the fact that the series will occasionally go, but sometimes we'll take that into account. Davison is working very hard here. He's walking around the set, stroking it, chef's kiss, having fun, getting used to playing Doctor Who, and he's a busy actor. Which I've said this before about Davison. He's he's still a very good television actor, but for television of this period, where you don't have the same kind of cutting, where essentially you've got three cameras on a three-walled set. So when you see an actor go from one end of the set to another, there's no sort of you can't cheat much of it with cameras and editing. So the actors have to keep it interesting, and Davison, I think, is an exemplar of that. The Monopticons, grabbed by the Monopticons, is always funny. I don't know why, but this is a very good effect. I think they're really convincing, and they're a nice thing. That could easily be done with just a security camera, but they're a bit of fun. They're a sort of setting point of the story. You always want a sort of science fiction thing, and the fringing on here is not bad at all. It's imperceptible. So I think they're a very strong, and they're a nice idea. And I like this kind of, he's taking his time. Yes, he is, Tegan. That's right. You've brought me to what I was saying. I actually don't mind. It reminds me a bit of 60s Who, this, in a way, in its sort of exploratory pacing. Now, I wouldn't like it if all Doctor Who was like this, and I probably wouldn't like it if Doctor Who was like this now. But as an exercise in nostalgia, there will be an occasion where I quite fancy watching a story where people walk around a spaceship quite slowly. And I do like the gag of always missing Heathrow fatigue, and I think that's quite fun. I don't like the nice chap called Burt Russell is an attempt to joke that I've got to be positive. I do struggle with how they try to characterize Adric. I know he's supposed to be a bit of a precocious teenager, but that precociousness needs to come with a certain sort of lovability, and I think they struggle with that. I was in love with Nyssa. Interesting, isn't it? Because they're both very beautiful women, but I had my heart was for Nyssa because I was younger, I guess. But I wanted to marry Nyssa. I love Nyssa, and I like her outfit as well. I like her velvet thing. But obviously, I like I've since had occasion to go for the stroppy, bossier ones of the Tegan mould. So life's a journey. I think the lighting here is excellent, and I think the set design by Tony Burrow is excellent. And Tony Burrow, I failed to. I often get emails when they're doing making-ofs for the Blu-rays going, where are these people? And Tony Burrow is an Oscar-nominated set designer. He got an Oscar nomination for the film Richard III. He's been Emmy-nominated. He's won a BAFTA. Was designing movies till 2007. So you think, well, he's going to be easy to find. He's interviewed in the Doctor Who 20th anniversary Radio Times special as well, and there's a picture. So you sort of go, oh, well, I know that's now 30 years old, but I think of it as quite new because I remember when it was new. So you think, oh, these are all people that are about. And we never got hold of Tony, who would have been a great contributor to the recently filmed Two Doctors documentary, for example. And so you go, wow, maybe he just doesn't. And I knew Richard Bigner had written, and he'd not heard back. So you think, well, maybe he just doesn't want to be involved. So God bless Tariq Latif, who is somebody I've engaged in many conversations with on Twitter. One of those lovely cyberspace back and forth, who just mentioned that 20 years ago he got a lift with Tony Burrow, and I went, wish we could find him. And he went, I'm still in touch with his son. And so, exclusive everybody, Tony Burrow, who has not contributed to any of the DVD and Blu-rays, just spent last week 2 hours on the phone with me. So as an accompaniment to this commentary on Happy Times and Places, we're going to have not a commentary so much as we're going to have a little extra that is not available anywhere else, which is an interview with Tony Burrow. Probably just a short gallop through his who's for non-patrons. My Patreon people get stuff that is, well, they get it quicker, which means they get it fuller, because then I don't have to worry about editing it and I can just slap the whole thing. So there are advantages and disadvantages, I guess. But I'm so delighted to have discovered Tony, because I kind of knew I'd worked. His brother's an actor called John Darrell, and I worked with John years and years ago. He said, my brother designed Doctor Who. And so it's nice to find out how John was as well. John, a very colourful, fruity Shakespearean actor. Perhaps too big for TV, but he'd have been good in a Doctor Who. He'd have given a lot of colour to. He'd have been an excellent Richard Mace or something like that. But I've digressed. Apologies. I don't apologise, because I feel there may need to be some digression. Well, maybe not. Maybe this is more interesting than I'm giving it credit for, because I think, look at that lighting. I'm assuming it's Don Babbage doing the lighting. It's glorious. I think it's really atmospheric. I think it conjures spaceship. I think it conjures technology, but it also makes for great pictures. It's really well done, and it complements Tony Burrow's excellent, sturdy, double-level sets. And I love the way you see the light on the other side of that sliding door. Nice sliding door as well, with an accompanying sound. So I think that the lighting, the sound, and the design are all working wonders here. And I think John Black's direction is elegant. He did Keeper of Traken as well. That's not to say it's perfect, but I think it suits look at the light coming through the ceiling and coming from the sides, coming through the grills. Yeah, they're working really hard, I think, because they've realised that this is... Oh, and then the door slide. We don't see that door slide, but we see it slide because we see the light. So I think, you know, and I think because it is it's setting up a mystery. It's not telling us anything yet, or it's telling us little snippets. And it's. I think if it reminds me of anything, it reminds me of 60s Doctor Who. I think I've said that because I don't think Doctor Who was ever quite as odd again as it was after the Hartnell era, actually. And yes, there are stories that are surreal, but surreal is a stronger word than odd. There are stories that are avant-garde, which again I think is slightly more robust in its strangeness than odd. I think this story is odd, and I think that is one of the things in its favour. How Can Earthlings Have Penetrated Us is one for the fans of cheap jokes at the expense of dialogue that is perfectly reasonable in context. But I've thrown it out there just because I like to please everybody. And you can add your own punchline to that. But I remember as a kid, because this is a new story to me. You know, this is I'm well remembering Doctor Who now, and I remember as a kid aching for, you know, a story about Doomsday. Doomsday conjures images of... Well, I remember being a bit disappointed with the book of the Doomsday weapon as well, because it promised all sorts of alien creatures and claws and things on the cover, and it was colonists squabbling with miners. And I was like, oh, and it's not even called the Doomsday weapon because you read in the bits it's based on a story called Colony in Space. So I remember being a bit disappointed by that. I am Monarch, and I am Monarch. You look as if you might be. Some of the jokes in this, I have to say, I don't get. Oh, and Enlightenment and Persuasion. I don't think we ever quite get decent close-ups of Enlightenment and Persuasion's masks. Stratford Johns exudes a laissez-faire authority, a natural authority. He's not acting big, he's not acting king, but he has enough presence that he has a quiet, just that slight lean forward that he's doing, but he's not spitting out his dialogue. He's he's doing a bit of enjoying it there, but he's generally got that sort of casual confidence about him, and he does all the sort of nonsense well, and Nathan Turner liked his Z-Cars actors, and I remember, you know, that was a thing. Whenever there was a Z-Cars person in a Doctor Who, somebody go, "Oh yes, it's so and so from Z-Cars," and they all ended up doing it in the end. Most of them, no Jeremy Kemp or Joseph Brady, but we had Stratford Johns, Brian Blessed, Frank Windsor, Jimmy Ellis. And I remember sort of thinking, oh well, because everybody knows they are from Z-Cars, I'm not that excited about them. And then you go back and realise quite how important Z-Cars was and how damn good those actors were. Stratford Johns and Frank Windsor are extraordinarily good in those early Z-Cars episodes because they have a naturalness about them that is quite stark for television of that time when you compare it to what surrounds it. And he was a strong actor, Stratford Johns, and I think he does this really well. Not to mention Annie Lambert and Paul Shelley, who I'm sure that we'll talk about. But I'm reminded that I remember not only was it called 4 to Doomsday, it was written by Terence Dudley. Now, I didn't know who Terence Dudley was. I wasn't, you know, on point enough to realise that he was the guy that directed Meglos. That's interesting, isn't it? That he's we don't really think about Terence. You know, we know of Peter Grimwade as a writer and director and a very different beast at both, but Terence Dudley sort of brought in to direct Meglos, which nobody writes home about, and then they go, can you write some as well? And there's some beautifully kind of cross exchanges between him and Eric Saywood. Dudley doesn't seem to have been anybody's favourite person, and yet he manages to carve out a career at the BBC for years. But for me, because I'd got a shelf full of books by Terence Dicks, the very fact that somebody was called, and I had an uncle Terence, but because you know, I wasn't, you know, my reading wasn't amazing because I was when this was on, I was 6 or 7 but I saw just the fact that it was written by someone called Terence, to me, evoked Old Who, and of course everything that was on before I was cognizant or before my memory automatically had an allure and a sheen of greatness, because it was before my time, so therefore better. I've always been a nostalgist. No, nostalgia is things that you remember from the past. I'm worse than I'm nostalgia for time before I existed. Is this one of your dropping times? Although the subtitle said drop it. Is it drop in or is it dropping? The subtitle said drop in, but it does sound like you're saying dropping. I don't care. This is not Heathrow Airport. I love what Stratford-John's doing. This is not Heathrow Airport. He does as a sort of statement of fact, even though he doesn't sort of know what Heathrow Airport is. But then that laugh he does is great. That he's sort of joining in, but he's also menacing, and it's a great mask. Is it Dorka Nieradzik who did the makeup? I'm guessing it was. She is also interviewed in that Radio Times 20th anniversary special, which is a great stop-off point. For me, it was where that and Doctor Who: A Celebration. In fact, I'm going to do a podcast about an indefinable magic, I think, about the celebration and the 20th anniversary Radio Times special, because I think they are the things that made me cross the Rubicon from boy to fan. In just 7 days, I can make you a fan. Yeah, it is a really good mask. But I love the fact that Adric grasps the theory of relativity, and Tegan is the best drawer in the whole world. I remember my sister, I think, was watching this at the time, and us go, would she? Wow, they're really good. I enjoyed art, and I like that slight threat that he gives, because there's not been an awful lot of menace apart from the fact that the aliens are green. But look at that! She's a superb draftswoman, is Tegan. She's wasted on getting lost in space. She should be at art school. Yeah, and because of course those doors would have been quite clattery, and smooth movement, bit of Dick Mills sound effect, and you get something special. And look how solid these sets are, and the double level and the robust. In a show that does have sort of weakness and clatteriness, with control banks and scenery and stuff like that, I think this is great. Now this is interesting. Now, interesting box. Look to the bottom of your screen, and I think you will see, yes, the head there of a special effects person crouching behind the control panel. I think Stratford-Johns is giving a different performance here. I've got a feeling these are his first scenes, so I think his makeup is slightly different. But I also think he's being a bit more of a sort of gruff alien. And I think this scene, and maybe his last scene, where he gets shrunk, are in here. And I think are in the first... I could be completely wrong about this. Yeah, this is too primitive for my technology. I'm doing sort of alien acting. And I think somebody's had a word and gone, I don't think you need to do that. And so then he's gone for the slightly more naturalistic, and I think more effective. And I like unnaturalistic acting in Doctor Who. I like big acting in Doctor Who, and I think sometimes you need that sort of Shakespearean heft to give grandeur to, or to match the unusualness of the situations. But I actually think I like it when Johns goes the other way with that casual authority that he has, playing against the strangeness. If you say past the... I actually was at school with a guy who said past the sodium chloride, and I liked him, actually. He was a nice chap, but I find it massively punchable now. Sorry, and I'm not a violent man. Now, apparently there's the chances of Tegan knowing this language are impossible, but it doesn't matter. I think it's quite nice when you have, she's a companion and she's Australian, and they go, well, let's have something in the story that can bring that into play, even if it's just for a moment like this. I think that's intelligent use of the companion, even if it's totally unlikely. And there's something very interesting about having the different cultures. I think it could have been explored better if they'd given these characters a bit more to do other than dancing. Time spent dancing, I think, could have been spent, examining the cultures and the different characters' reactions. Philip Locke, I can't quite get to grips with whether I think Philip Locke is brilliant in this or awful. Again, it's quite an odd performance, and in some moments I find him heart-rendingly beguiling and strange and offbeat. At other points I find him really odd and tonally misjudged. But I find that a bit with the direction as well. I think some of it is sort of elegant, and some of it is clunky. It's a weird mix. And Bert Kwok, a legend, a national treasure, and that's a terrible joke. I'm Lynn Futer. You'd never have guessed it. You're in the best. That's awful. It's just on every level. And he's had a few of those, Davison, sort of witty comebacks to somebody saying their name or something, and him saying something, vaguely, almost sort of racist. I'll say something and you're a frog-like alien, so I'll say something back that seems like a quip but isn't, and same with it. Yeah, the jokes in this aren't great, shall we say? And Tegan's drawings have come to life, which is a nice, strange thing, and you can see now that it's the wonderful Paul Shelley, excellent actor, and Annie Lambert, who is in a lot around this time, and you have one of the weirdest cliffhangers in all of Doctor Who, and Stratford-Johns gets second billing. Love that. Love it when a guest actor gets promoted above the companions. I don't know why, I just do. I think it's because I think Stratford-Johns should be credited above Matthew Waterhouse. I think Paul Shelley should be as well. Paul Shelley, we'll talk about Paul Shelley in future episodes. But it's a really strange, and I remember when it happened, going, "Oh, I expected cliffhangers to be more like, kill him now," and all of that. But do you know what? I kind of like it. It's weird, and because you don't have to wait till next Saturday either, because there was 2 episodes a week. I think it is a kind of oh really, what and as I say, this isn't particularly what I wanted of Doctor Who at the time, but I find myself, and also, part of this is that I do get to talk all the way through it, which means that some of it's some of the time that it takes to unfold, I have managed to fill by gassing. That's the nature of a commentary. And if I was purely watching this, would I be checking Twitter or, having a quick go on the cricket game on my iPhone or something? I might be, but I think that's a conversation to be had about our wavering attention spans. I think there's enough in there that's beguiling, that's offbeat, that's strange, that's different. And hey, one of the joys about Doctor Who is that infinite format that it has, and this wants to be a strange. I think the sort of mix of cultures thing is very interesting. We don't quite know what the plot is yet. There's a vague sort of semblance of threat. There's certainly an interesting villain that you want to see more of in Monarch. There's this, but we don't know what the story is, and it's a kind of WTF, as the kids say. So I enjoyed that, even though it is a bit strange, and I think I think the TARDIS is a bit too crowded, and I think some of the writing of the Doctor and Adric in particular is leaves something to be desired. Its sense of humour is I think slightly skew-if, but it has other bits of sort of offbeat dialogue and stuff that I think are quite charming. And also, I think, Stratford Johns does brilliantly with some of the stuff that he's given. He just makes it seem so right and seem so interesting. Good actors can just make nonsense baffle go. I think the phrase I'm looking for is that I know. It's the phrase that came into my head as soon as before I started stumbling. It good actors can make smell sweet is the phrase. But the thing, and I suspected I was gonna. Well, I thought I might choose the sets actually, and I'm not just saying that because Tony Burrow has given me an interview. I've always liked his work, and I remember the last time I watched this, being really impressed with the design work. But actually, what really, and I wouldn't be surprised if it gets mentioned again and probably becomes one of my things. Interesting though, because James is a writer. He's gonna like weird things because he's a funny fella. But I have to choose the lighting, which I think is, I didn't even check, I think is Don Babbage. I just think there's a really strong use of lighting there, and it's it's compensating for a lot of wandering around corridors, but it's so inventive. There's so much attention to detail in it, and it's not just the light streaming in from off when the doors slide open and coming through the grill, but then there's the different coloured lighting, that red stuff in that red hue in the bay where in the laboratory where the TARDIS lands. And I haven't even mentioned the music, which I also like. I'm going to say Don Babbage's lighting is my favourite thing about episode 1 of 4 to Doomsday. What is James Goss's favourite thing about episode 1 of 4 to Doomsday?
The best thing about episode 1 of 4 to Doomsday is the corridors, because it is the best looking spaceship that there has ever been in the history of Doctor Who, and I think you should fight me.
The corridors. Do I get half a point for that? I mean, I did talk about the set design. That might have scuppered me for the set design as well. Damn. I did talk about how the corridors were lit. Well, look, if it comes to a photo finish, which it won't, I might take a sprinkling of victory to nudge me over the finish line from episode 1. But let's see, well, look, we've got 4 episodes till the Doomsday of this particular run of Happy Times and Places. Well, only 3 now. 3 to Doomsday. We've got 4 choices till Doomsday because James has to choose 1 from each remaining episode plus 1 bonus thing. So yeah, we'll see if my vague crossover with James in episode 1 helps me with any of the 4 more choices till I face the Doomsday of yet another failure to get anywhere close to a victory in Happy Times and Places. I've torturously tried to do 2 4 to Doomsday appropriate bits of wordplay there to tie it in with this, but I think it means I've made more sense of what 4 to Doomsday means in Happy Times and Places than I ever have quite with the story. But anyway, I enjoyed that. I found that interesting and odd and strange, and I think it's partially because it's not a story I visit a lot. See, there's always something in Doctor Who, isn't there? So, join me for the next 3 episodes. But for now, enjoy the rest of whatever it is you're doing today, and come back to me when the rest of these episodes go out, where I can guarantee you a little bit of enlightenment and perhaps a little bit of persuasion that 4 to Doomsday is not as bad as you thought it was. Thanks very much indeed. Ta-ta. Well, welcome everybody. I thoroughly enjoyed, in a strange kind of way, episode 1 of 4 to Doomsday, or Inside the Spaceship, which is where we spent that first instalment. And we left on a very strange cliffhanger. I'm in the company of James Goss. He chose the corridors. I chose the lighting, but I like the lighting of the corridors. Certainly the design is getting a thumbs up from James and I. Let's see what we will enjoy about episode 2. I'm watching on BritBox, even though I also have it on DVD and on Blu-ray. So what is going to happen to all this stuff when I die? So people are going, why has he got it? What? Anyway, but I think we all have that in common, don't we? So, I also have signed photos of some of the let's not get into that. Watch from the... We're strange people, aren't we? We're not as strange as anybody else, actually. Well, I just think we allow our strangeness a full flourish. I think other people try and keep a lid on their strangeness, and it makes them furious. Whereas, actually, I think if you embrace it, and just... I'm aware that what I do is nonsense, but life is kind of nonsense. And if you don't give full rein to your... And I'm not saying, oh, aren't I wacky? Because I hate those people too. I'm just going, there's nothing... We all have characteristics that are probably, you can trace back to the animal within us. And this is, based on, we catalogue things and keep them in order and obsess over them because they're the things that make you feel safe. And if you feel safe, you are less on edge. And if you're less on edge and feel that your nest is surrounded by the things that you enjoy and that make you comfortable and stimulate you, you better function in life. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it as I watch a piece of television from the early 1980s that I've seen many, many times before when I haven't read all of James Joyce's Ulysses or learnt to make pasta. But there we go. That's the journey I'm taking through life. And this is going to be a journey on a very slow spaceship. So we're going to watch from the beginning of episode 2 as I press whatever it is I press in 3, 2, 1. And watch from the beginning. So it's going to start with... I know some people hate this theme. I actually rather like it. I'm not wild about... Davison's face, I've said this before, I think. Davison's face is not great for the title sequence. That pleasant open face. And it opens like a Venetian blind. I wasn't wild about the neon logo, but I quite like it now. I still don't think any of it's a patch on the earlier stuff, but maybe it has nostalgia for me. I don't know. Yes, because some of you listening to this, I suppose, you know, this will be an old story for you, whereas for me, as I said last time, it's a modern one. It's a new Doctor. I watched this story unfold. And then I reading the credits, you go, a lot of those people are dead now. Well, of course they are, because when I watched this, I was 6 or 7, and I'm at least 40 years older than that. 40 years! So hang on, this is as old as now as the war was when I was watching this. That's how far away it was. It's very... I think it's quite artful to... Well, no, it's quite appropriate to have the two of them dressed in green. They are the frog-like creatures. So, it's a bit on the nose, but it works. And for the younger members of the audience, it is an echo of those creatures that we saw them as first. I wish we'd had a better look at the close-up of their masks. Maybe he didn't do a close-up of the masks because they didn't spend a lot of time working on them because they were only going to be used for a very short amount of time. Paul Shelley is a marvellous, marvellous actor. And quite big news at the time. I remember he was in Secret Army. He was in a few things on the telly, but he'd also had come or was about to come to the Ludlow Festival. I live, Minister of Enlightenment. He's got a very nice, sharp features and a pointed voice, which makes him excellent for heroism, also for authority, but also for sort of arch villainy. He's a well sculpted actor, I think, tonally and visually, facially. He's got a great pointed face, and has had a fine career. I mean, he was playing lead roles at the Globe Theatre in relatively recent history. Brother of the actor Francis Matthews. He was somebody that I'd approached for Who's Round via a friend. Somebody just emailed me and said, I sort of know Paul Shelley. Shall I ask? And I went, oh yeah, great. And got a message back saying, no, it's not really his thing. And then Lisa Bowerman asked him not that long after, and he was really enthusiastic, and he missed his train, and he went to the trouble of looking up my agent and ringing my agent and saying, I don't have his number, can you call him and say, I'm sorry that I'm late, and blah, blah, blah. And I bought many people a meal for doing Who's Round, and he would only accept a chocolate muffin, and was game and enthusiastic, and made the journey in. He doesn't live in London. So having had a no from one advance, got a yes from another. Look at the depth of that set. They're going out into the lighting. Very, very good design. So I'm very fond of Paul Shelley, and I know he's not embraced sort of fan events or anything with any greater enthusiasm, because I know he's been approached and it's been very polite. It's just not his thing. So I still don't quite know why. And I'm not saying it's anything about me, because I have equally had people who have said no to me, and I've gone, oh, well, they're obviously it's not their thing, who've then said yes to loads of other people. So I think there's a few of us who've sort of tried to trace and track down sort of support players or people a bit further down the cast list, or, you know, not to complete all of that, the sort of jigsaw puzzle of Doctor Who. And sometimes being very professional and saying your BBC credentials really helps. And I remember trying desperately I tried so many different approaches for Norman Jones, who was Major Baker in the Silurians, and Chris Song in the Abominable Snowman, Hieronymus in the Mask of Mandragora. And I thought, well, the final what I'll do is I'll wear all my official, I'll put all my CV stuff, because I'll come across as a real professional, and either got nothing or no, he's not interested. But then I discovered later a friend of mine who'd written as a sort of enthusiastic, just an enthusiastic sort of non-media type, as it were, and got a lovely reply. So, and I discovered later about Norman that he was slightly disappointed by the end of his career and thought he'd been let down by the industry. So me coming across as, oh, well, I'm professional, I'm from the industry, was actually totally the wrong approach. So that's just an example of that I'll probably use when I do the commentaries for Abominable Snowman, Doctor and the Silurians, and Mask of Mandragora. So it has no place here. But just I didn't want to seem boastful about saying, I got Paul Shelley and he doesn't do other stuff, because I've equally had people who've not spoken to me, have spoken to loads of other people. So and thank God for the likes of Ben Jolly and Lee Allam and Stephen Griffiths, who are and Alex Moore, who are other people who like to track people down. I love that effect with the monopticon and the hat dangling off it. Obviously that's on a bit of string, but it's still moving. And it's not moving like it's wobbling. That's a great shot. And of course called bankens, and I like the sort of bank of panels behind them. There's a real sense of scale there. Doctor Who is often feels like it's quite confined, and that can work to its advantage. And having small pokey sets in atmospheric stories can really work. But this, I think, has a great, excuse the pun, majesty about it. A real sense of this, because you need a sense of scale because of the sheer length of the journeys back and forth that this is taking. Soul is a blasphemy. I like that idea. Flesh time. And the whole thing. I like, having not liked some of the writing of the humour in particular. I do think things like the flesh time is a lovely evocative sort of phrase. And it means they're setting us up for a sort of different mindset. That's the interesting thing about these villains, is that they conduct their whole way of life in a totally different way, and I find that very interesting. Davison's already, I mean, he's landed fully formed, hasn't he? He even puts his hands in his pockets well. Excuse me for repeating myself, but I know not everybody listens to all of these. I was not a fan of Davison as a youth because he was not Tom Baker. And he wasn't one of the other Doctors that I hadn't really seen much of, but because they were on before I was born, they were brilliant. I love Davison now. I think he's probably the most consistent actor of the lot. I don't think he's... I think he judges his performance really well, and I think he rises beyond the limitations of what could be seen as the downfalls of the casting, i.e. that he's young and sort of fresh-faced, and I think he conveys intelligence, he conveys eccentricity, and he conveys, and I love that sort of desperate, that the fact that his voice goes to quite a high register means that he can do panic and he can do tetchiness, but crucially he suggests an older person in a younger person's body without sort of doing crusty, fusty acting. It's a great performance, and it's a character actor's performance in the body of a leading man. And credit to John Nathan Turner, because he, following Tom Baker is really hard, of course, really hard. Baker was, the definitive Doctor at the time, and that lasted for so long. He was everybody's, idea of Doctor Who. People still fondly remembered the old ones, but Tom Baker was such a success, certainly in my sphere of reference anyway. There was the odd bus driver who went, I like that John Pertwee the best. And yes, of course, the thing, your first Doctor is your favourite Doctor, but I think, Tom Baker made such an indelible mark on the show. Following him was hard, and I would argue harder than the job that I suppose Troughton had a hard job. Anyway, it was hard, and I think it was that's a nicely composed shot as well. And I think John Nathan Turner casting a star, all creatures great and small. Davison was such a well-known face. And casting from sort of left field, not trying to match Tom Baker, but going a completely different direction, was a canny piece of producership. And I think the viewing figures showed that, and Davison's performance showed that. And I think that was one of... It showed, it showed how strong Nathan Turner could be, whereas we know in other areas his judgment wasn't always on point. But I think there was a time when he couldn't put a foot right in the eyes of fans, myself included. I liked being an angry fan at that time, and actually that's it's his the balance of his successes and failures, I think, is more even than I think we sometimes, think when our thoughts of that time automatically kick in. Summon Bacon. He's great. He's good. I love the way he leans forward. I don't know why, because it's just sort of punctuating the sort of stiff kingliness thing, but it has a power to it. There's a lot of this, isn't there, of different extras representing different time periods doing dances, which is it's a thing. Somebody should have told those two resting extras to fold their arms in the same way, because they've decided to do them in different ways. I don't know. And that's... Now, I think that shot of Shelley there is taken from quite far away and zoomed in, and it just gives it a slightly different quality to if they'd had the camera up closer. And it sort of, again, it just helps to suggest people looking over each other, and the crowdedness and the distance between, and yeah. But as I say, yeah, it's a recreation. Yeah, now as I say, I think the whole thing about the different cultures is a really great concept, and I think you could do so much with it today that they don't do here. It's almost as if it's enough to say we have, you know, actors in different costumes, actors of obviously different ethnicity. Now, Philip Locke here, I remember his obit in, was it The Guardian, which was written by a friend, so it wasn't as objective as obits have to. They've changed their house style slightly. It might have been The Independent, but the same applies really. But it described him as playing a balmy android in Doctor Who. I just like the use of the word balmy, and I don't think he's so good at this sort of dialogue. So good at this sort of dialogue. Look at that set. Look at that lighting. Beautiful. And that Monopticon. This is all great. If ponderous. Music's good too. Very bright. Yeah, and so we've got... And I suppose this is quite 60s. I don't think Terence Dudley's ever watched Doctor Who before, do you? Or if he did, it was in about 1964. I think he watched The Censorites. He watched The Censorites, directed Meglos, and then did this, and this was the result. But he was an odd choice, and I know because I know Peter Davison is not a fan of Terence Dudley's scripts either, and didn't he? He seems to have had a history of sort of falling out with people who created his who created series that he produced, because I think he took Survivors into the sort of good life direction, didn't he? Which is not what Terry Nation had envisaged, and I don't think Pedler and Davis were wild about what he did with Doomwatch. So my impression is he seems to have spent a lot of his time pissing people off. I think he died on Christmas Day. So he even ruined Christmas. Oh, that's a terrible thing to say. But I would be interested. I don't know anyone that ever met him. I'd be interested in finding out a bit, because he was one of those. Because he was much more of a sort of name before he came to Doctor Who. Almost, this is like the sort of back end of his career, really. So when you think about Terence Dudley, you really sort of think about those producerships he had of those great series in the 70s, and this sort of weird Doctor Who flavoured coda that took him to retirement. But I'd be interested to, I don't know, because I've got sort of little nuggets about him. I'd be interested to get the full story, I think. So yes, I can imagine. I can't. Would he have had to have submitted a storyline? Episode 2: Doctor Who watches lots of dances and waves at one of the baddies, whilst wondering what's going on. They have lungs. Let them remember that. I think that's very nice, and that sort of emphasises, Monarch's whole ambivalence towards the organic. He wouldn't find many shops to his liking here in Chorlton, South Manchester, where you can't move for hummus and organic kale. And I always like Doctor Who when it contrasts, when it juxtaposes, so we've got somebody here who looks like a picture postcard Greek philosopher, and then they've gone for the very stereotypical look, but that's absolutely the right choice, because you've got him typing into a keyboard, and I love those chunky keyboards. They're much more, they make a great noise, and there's a lot of them in this period of Doctor Who, and I suppose to somebody that was born after me, they probably look a bit sort of quaint and old-fashioned, but to me they're great. They're sort of chunky, and I like the way they augment consoles in 80s Who. It's all, I guess, shows it's all about context and when you were born. But seeing a Greek philosopher typing into a Commodore 64 keyboard, I like that. I like what that's Doctor Who to me, colliding different recognizable things and making you look at them afresh and strange, and they look incongruous. And you know, that's what the concept of Doctor Who is. It's a police box on an alien planet. That's the essential of Doctor Who, and you know, a natural development of that is to have a Greek philosopher typing into keyboard. I like the way that Philip Locke does this, where he does that. Oh, I'm pretending I'm talking to you normally and explaining the fight, but I'm actually showing that I want to talk to you. I think he acted that well, and I think it's a nice moment between the characters. It's been one of my favourite bits so far, and it's I suppose it's the sort of the length of time that it takes adds to the tension. It's a funny old fight. The fight sequences in this are a bit odd. And of course, it was a good diversion of the Doctor, because you think, oh, it's a bit hoary that he does a feint. But actually, you know, it of course it distracts persuasion, which it's supposed to do, but also it ties in thematically with the pomposity that Monarch has about, you know, his way of being. So he's like, yeah, these fleshy people, these organic people, they faint, which means that it's useful to the plot as well as to the immediate needs of the story, which is to get Bygon out of the way and the Doctor to cause a distraction. I know they're supposed to be letting them sort of wander round, and she does raise the question of saying, is it wise to let them see? But I think your villains these days would just go, let's not let the people do the thing that might get them to find out bits about our plan. But I said, no, I suppose because Monarch is arrogant, and again, I think Johns is very good not to overplay that. He doesn't. I suppose he does have a superior tone, but he just pitches it right. It's a well pitched performance. Because there's some funny special effects in this, aren't there? Is there a stabbing now that is a bit weird, and it's but you do actually see the thing go through him. I remember that being awful. It's actually pretty good, isn't it? It's strange because it's done with a special effect, isn't it? To actually see the sword go through. A very stylized fight though. The fight is B.H. Barry, isn't it? Who also did the fight in. There's a lot of this, isn't there? As well. I don't know. I think there's just something quite comical about yet another dance. We've had them all now. Oh yes, and actually, it's rather good to see, Tegan so appalled by thinking she we get a bit blasé about death in Doctor Who, but this is one quite a nice riposte to that, where somebody's actually pretty disgusted by what she's seen, when actually ironically, isn't it, that we see there's so much real death that people don't bat an eyelid about, but this is a fake death. But again, it's one of those useful things, in a bit like the atmosphere that I was talking about in episode 1, that a series that is so often blasé about it's nice to occasionally have a more realistic reaction to death, just so that we take stock and just remind ourselves that the things that we take in our stride in these shows would be things that would absolutely appall us and give us PTSD within 5 minutes. And this is a great piece of, oh, hang on. So, okay, he's been stabbed, but he's not dead and he's been mended. What is that all about? And I suppose, we can guess because of the references to flesh time and that sort of thing, but we aren't quite sure. And it's letting its developments out, a bit at a time. That was very that was very pre-credit sequence in New Who, wasn't it? Somebody will advance towards us and we'll back away, because somebody's advancing slowly. Whereas if it hadn't been at a dramatic high point, they'd have just grabbed them and pulled them out. So the only organic life is in the floral chamber. He's got an odd diction, but I do like it. He only had one eye, Philip Locke, but we'll get into that in the next. Now, I remember this being a slightly naff effect as well, but actually, it's again yeah, that doesn't quite work. I can see what they're going for there, but of course, his face stays where it is when he lifts the mask, whereas of course, the mouth would move up. So a brave attempt to do an effect there that doesn't quite work, but actually the revealing of the chest is okay, and I adore that. And again, I remember at the time being slightly nonplussed by it because I was 6 and I wanted somebody to point a gun at somebody. But I think the sort of slightly plaintive way that he goes, "This is me," I find charming and weird. But it reveals that now I suppose the revelation that somebody is an android is a bit it's a bit bread and butter for Doctor Who, but the way that it's sort of drawn out in a way, and the way that they build up to it, the only organic life is in the floral chamber, and you know, this is me, rather than I'm an android, this is me, I think is charming and weird and slightly, and that, as I say, that slightly forlorn way that he does it, I think is really rather disarming. So again, I'm sort of speaking against my first experience of this show and saying that I really like that cliffhanger. I suppose because I've got so many Doctor Who cliffhangers that I've seen many times, and a lot of them are fairly similar, and these two aren't. You know, they're peculiar, and I think I'm going to choose the cliffhanger as my favourite thing of episode 2. This is me. Even though I think the bit where he lifts his head is obviously where they've superimposed Philip Locke's face onto the mask, but of course then when the mask lifts, the face stays where it is and of course vanishes, but it doesn't vanish in the way. Yeah, it doesn't quite work, which adds to the slightly weird disjointedness of this story, which I've always acquainted with. You go, oh yeah, it's quite slow and wandering about a spaceship, but it's quite charming and quite philosophical, and there's nothing bad about it. And then you go, oh no, there are a series of really bad special effects, which because I'd completely forgotten and gone, yeah, there's not that many, because the stabbing was fine and the revealing of the chest was okay, although the circuitry does look like it's sort of been jammed into a cupboard. It doesn't look like the sort of beating android heart of a it's not Blade Runner, is it? It's like a box of spare parts. But I've just remembered there's some very bad special effects still to come. But which I wonder if it didn't have a couple of sequences that are really, quite poor. I wonder if we would be more charmed by this story. But I suppose we want a bit more excitement from our Doctor Who, do we, than this? But if I want an exciting Doctor Who, I've got plenty on the shelf. So again, it is with the benefit of the fact that I have every episode of Doctor Who in several different formats and can choose one with machine guns whenever I want, that I feel that this also has a place in the canon, which, as I say, I'm not sure was my feeling when I watched it as a kid. But I was 6, what did I know? What does James... I wasn't 6, I was 7. Was I 7? 6, 7? Oh, I was 8. 6, 7, 8. I was 8. I still didn't know very much. So, James Goss, what does he think of part 2? And what does he choose as his favourite thing? We had a similar little bit of smattering of crossover with the first one. I'm hoping he's chosen the cliffhanger. I feel that he might have done. I'm feeling, I was going to say quietly confident. I've just said it out loud about this one. James.
The best thing about episode 2 is obviously enlightenment and persuasion, because they are Doctor Who villains literally drawn from a companion's mind, and they are sassy. Even a story as wonderful as 4 to Doomsday does not necessarily deserve enlightenment and persuasion, because they are fabulous. And my favourite moment, even though it isn't necessarily from this episode, is definitely, yes, Doctor, the poor are always with us. These are villains who know they're on a Doctor Who story and are really, really enjoying it. Hooray!
Enlightenment and persuasion are good. They're very 80s as well, aren't they? They look very 80s. Paul Shelley was also, he'd been in Tale of Two Cities as well, hadn't he? Directed by Michael Bryant, playing the lead in that. So, you know, very, very... Oh, or had he been in that, or was he about to be in it? Look it up. This is, I'm not IMDb today. But he was a face of the 80s, and Annie Lambert was also a face of the 80s. So that, you know, this is Doctor Who, you know, it was always, oh, it's that person. And I think it just always gave something a sheen of quality of people that you'd seen from other things turned up and lent their heft to silly old Doctor Who. It made you think, oh, Doctor Who's not silly. These are, you know, this is stuff that attracts quality. So yeah, well done for choosing enlightenment and persuasion. Would I have chosen them? I don't know. Maybe I've sort of rather taken them for granted. And they look great. I love his velvet jacket. And she's stunningly beautiful. Anyway, James chose enlightenment and persuasion. I chose the cliffhanger. Well, that was him. And this is me. Ta-ta. Well, welcome everybody back to this particular run of Happy Times and Places, where the place is a big old spaceship with a hydroponic centre, some excellent sets and some fine lighting, and the happiness comes from the sets and the fine lighting, but maybe some other places as well. I'm in quite a buoyant mood this evening. Sometimes these things are simply dictated by what's going on. It's not even what's going on. I have no external stimuli have cheered me up. I just happen to be bouncier this evening. Right. Anyway, you don't need to know, do you? You don't care about you, Toby. What? We just care about Doctor Who. Quite right, too. So, we're going to watch from the beginning. I am watching episode 3, accompanied by James Goss, of 4 to Doomsday. And I'm going to get it to start in 3, 2, 1. So, of course, we're in the beginning of the second week. I suppose it's a bit like Doctor Who these days, isn't it? Is that you get 50 minutes of Doctor Who over the course of a week. It's just this was split up into weekdays. I was never very happy with it being on weekdays, because I had at this time been sent to boarding school, not because we're posh, because we didn't have any money, and Mum had to go back to work. And so a local school took me in, paid for by a charity. So I was only down the road, but it meant I slept there. But that meant... oh, no. Did that happen this year? You don't care. It doesn't matter. No, I actually saw this go out. That happened next year. That was to come. I was blissfully ignorant of the fact that the following year I was going to miss Doctor Who as it went out. I saw these go out live. Watched on a black and white portable television. Though it's funny, because I don't see this in black and white. I see it in colour, although when I first did see it, we had a black and white telly. We didn't get a colour telly for quite some time. The Two Doctors, I think. That's terrifying, isn't it? Philip Locke. I love Philip Locke, and I'm really liking his performance in this. I'd had a difficulty with it. I think he says by Zeus at one point in a later episode that's not especially convincing. But anyway, I love this sort of sing-song melancholy that he has, and he had a fine stage career. He was I used to watch quite often. I'm a big fan of the play Antony and Cleopatra, and there was an RSC version that before they did sort of National Theatre Live and stuff, they sort of did a televised version. It was the stage production, but it was a really well filmed. They sort of thought about how to present it on camera. Production of Antony and Cleopatra, Richard Johnson and Janet Sussman were the title roles, and Patrick Stewart was Enobarbus, and a very leering Agrippa, which in the play itself is sort of basically, you know, one of Caesar's henchman guys. But Philip Locke and Patrick Godfrey were Agrippa and Maecenas, and I think they've rolled a couple of, you know, they gave them a few extra lines, rolled a couple of parts into them, and he's a really memorable Agrippa. But he was of course also Peter Quince in the very famous Peter Brook Midsummer Night's Dream, which also starred Tommy off of Planet of the Spiders. John Cain was Puck, and Philip Locke was Peter Quince, and in a landmark, you know, world-changing production set on, you know, trapezes on a white set. Anyway, the Chinaman. Oh dear. But I like all of this, you know, pondering on what existence means. You know, is Bygone any less in existence because he is, you know, a load of different circuits, in the same way that actually if you boil us down to our constituent parts, although it is flesh, we are in the flesh time, it is the flesh that transmits our neurons and our thoughts and our, you know, and powers us via oxygen, and, you know, how we process different things to make this organic vehicle move. Why is that any different to a series of you know, electronic cables and silicon chips and all of that? And yeah, external and internal. Yeah, the organs aren't too bad, Monarch, but let's not get into that. What about love? That's the great you know, cliche of what you say, isn't it, to a machine in science fiction? But I like the way that Enlightenment describes it as the exchange of two fantasies. And now Adric wades in, and wouldn't it be lovely if Adric was being full of guile and conning Monarch in order to find things out? But no, Adric's just being stupid. So I don't know why they thought that to make him constantly wrong, and usually for a hot-headed, impetuous, and not very likable motivation. Why anyone thought that was a good idea, I have no idea, and I do feel sorry for Matthew Waterhouse, because there's no irony, there's no twinkle in what he does. He's a prick. I mean, and it's suddenly kicked in, hasn't it? Because we haven't really had the plot kick in, and now suddenly we're going, oh, everyone's an android, and Monarch wants to invade the Earth. What? Hang on, was there any real sort of statement about that? Well, that was it. So yeah, so we're suddenly getting a big info dump. It's an interesting way to tell the story, isn't it? Because this is essentially V, or the Claws of Axos. Aliens turn up and go, we're really nice. Well, this is what Monarch's planning to do. But actually are there for nefarious means. Now, the way they've decided to tell this story is that we don't get to Earth. Because this story ends before Monarch's plan is put into operation. Yeah, I'm not having just eulogized for. I wasn't a great fan of the way he says with this, he will conquer Earth. It's a very odd bit of emoting that when he's doing the sort of subtle, strange, you know, slight melancholy rather well. That desperation about conquering Earth, well, I would say it was not his métier. Whereas, because he's not a stranger to genre. He's Vargas in Thunderball. Vargas does not drink, does not sleep, does not make love. What a series of wonderful parts he had. A proper, just in those days when actors just worked and worked, playing all sorts of great parts on stage, then nipping in to do a bit of telly, making the odd film. Oh, heaven! I love the way that my father was killed by a tyrant, as if that's some sort of job description. Yes, I don't trust. I can understand you sort of saying I don't trust helicopters. My father was killed in a helicopter, but tyrant is a slightly it's a slightly less exact demarcation, isn't it? It's that my father was killed by a baddie. Is essentially what she's saying. Is he doing a sort of Greek? I suppose he's doing a sort of the way that Greek drama was done. It was very declamatory and involved hand movements because they wore masks. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt here because I've sort of enjoyed him. I knew there was a reason. Yeah. Now, that's all a bit weird, isn't it? Monarch believes that he will meet himself. So Monarch is an absolute Fruit Loop. Which again, I mean, does it mean that Stratford John should be doing more? No, and apparently some of the crew told Stratford John's was a bit too over the top. I actually think there's an argument to say I really like his performance, but there's an argument to say he could chew the scenery a bit more, seeing as he's playing somebody who thinks he's God. I think it really, really works that he is so. He's not underplaying it because he's not mumbling it, but he's casual in his power and his confidence, which I enjoy. That's it, Adric. You tell the bad guy everything. Time and relative. Yes, it's quite chatty at the moment. This, isn't it? Which is I'm aware what I've got to be. Yeah, you mind your manners, my dear. Yeah, he is great, Stratford Johns. I think it's got a yes, Adric, you tell them about the bathroom. Another shortcoming of the flesh time. He's guileless, isn't he, Adric? And I obviously I spent a very nice weekend with Matthew Waterhouse. He walks in a funny way as well. Yeah. Yes, because you figured him out. One only harms that which one fears. I like that. That's very good. There's some elegant lines in this. I have free will. Oh, so he's got a... Right. Oh, poor old Bygon, therefore, has spent, 2,500 years wanting to do something about it, and he's not been able to. God, they must be bored. I mean, 4 to Doomsday takes place during the most exciting time on this spaceship, and it's not that exciting. So poor old Bygon has had to spend 2,500 years prior to this when Doctor Who wasn't there. It's no wonder he's slightly unsure how to convey emotion. Very good, energetic. He's at keeping the see that high pitched streaky thing that he does. He is racing to keep. Tennant's very good at this as well, of keeping the drama heightened by. It also gets exposition out nice and quickly. Of doing it as a sort of frantic, call to arms in a way. Of I'm getting this out because we've got somewhere else to be to stop the bad things happening, and it's a very clever decision. Especially in a story that involves lots of wandering up and down a spaceship. Now I got a feeling Nissa gets hypnotised, isn't? I think this might be a track on the Doctor Who the Music album that I still have somewhere on vinyl. Yeah. It's actually not much. You can't really get down and boogie to it. It's not the it's oh yeah, I remember that. Yes, do. Yeah, it's quite funky, but it's not. You know, it's not what you put on to get jiggity to. So I put it on a lot because I did more of putting on unjiggity music than I did getting jiggity. No, it's not Monarch, but you and your bad guys have not risen from your chairs for the whole episode, so the audience's patience is not inexhaustible either. So this has been, that's nice. Oh, so this is right. So you've got a bit of fun now with the Doctor going around and distracting the Monopticons. Uses his cricket ball to do it, which is rather nice. And gives the sonic screwdriver a little sort of whirl in order to spin the Monopticons round, and that's a great effect. So that's fun. Always feels nice when the Doctor starts to sort of undermine the status quo. I still am entirely unsure why Monarch thinks he's God, unless apart from, I guess, the fact that he's just right. The creator, yeah. That I haven't entirely got to grips with that part of Monarch's motivation, but I kind of like it, and I don't know why. Maybe because it's slightly unclear. This is a terrible waste of Burt Kwok, isn't it? An OBE. I will one day do a podcast about people in Doctor Who who've been honoured by the Queen, because I'm quite proud of the fact that the earliest person chronologically in Doctor Who's history to get one, in terms of when they appear or are involved in Doctor Who, is not somebody you would think had one. Is probably not somebody you even think about at all, because their contribution is so minor even to the story that they're involved with, that you wouldn't have thought that they would be somebody who had an MBE, but they are. But we will wait until we do that story, which nobody has... somebody has chosen it, but they haven't done it. Anyway, but Burt Kwok definitely deserved his OBE for his... I think it was an OBE for contributions to drama. Kato in the Inspector Clouseau films always put a smile on our faces as a family, and then he was, the contrast of that, him playing General Yamauchi in the brilliant series Tenko, shows just what a fine actor he was. And he was still working, up until he only died 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5 now as I record this, but he was still very much part of the cultural furniture, and I never had the pleasure, unfortunately, but a legend, and I mean, playing a really terrible part in this. The good thing about the TARDIS crew is that you really want to spend time hanging around with them, because they're identification figures and such good fun. Whereas, of course, in real life, if you knock somebody out, causing somebody a concussion enough to knock them out is extremely dangerous. And if you liked them, no, she's right to go. See, that's beautiful, that doorway and that light, but there is an awful lot of walking about, isn't there? I still don't think I mind it. Although if there was a story like this today, I would probably be quite irritated, because I'd be thinking about the general public. And I do remember at the time crying out for an actual invasion. I remember that the title excited me so much. I think I said this in episode 1. Although I still don't... Is it the 4 lead characters to Doomsday? Is it 4 days to Doomsday? Or is it both? Another great set there. I mean, I know it's just a few pot plants stuck about, but it's elegantly done, and all the colours are nice. It looks really good. And I think they had to work quite hard in those days. It just goes to show in those days they had to work quite hard, I think, to get the extras playing the ethnic characters. I think. I mean, because there've always been agencies that have specialised in. I mean, even in the early 70s, Christopher Coombe, who's in The Mind of Evil, had an agency that specialised in, actors of different ethnicities. So that if there was a production that was set in a particular country, he sort of got it sewn up, although it didn't work particularly well, because in Mind of Evil, he ended up being in it because the actor he provided, Andy Ho, was deemed not good enough and fired. But anyway, we'll do that in Mind of Evil. But even so, I think, because obviously they're not actors, they're not speaking parts, so an agency, you'd need an extras agency, really. And I've got a feeling that the extras playing these characters came from the local Chinese restaurant. I'm sure that was. I'm sure that's not a myth. It might be a myth. We can have myths in this because I haven't done my homework. I am reacting. I'm doing what Fraser Sines always said when we did commentary. So I think the audience prefer it if they get my immediate reactions. It's like, what you mean there, Fraser, is you prefer not to do your homework, which he's under absolutely no obligation to be. But don't pretend you're doing it for the audience. So Lin Futu did get something to do there. He got to eavesdrop a little bit in order, I think, to go and report to... Oh, gosh! Isn't this the funny scene where she... Doesn't she do a bit where she takes off and has the strangest reaction to materialising in space? Yes. Oh, it's all coming back to me. I haven't watched this for ages. Oh, right. So that's it. By Zeus. Oh, dear. Isn't it interesting? Because he's a really, really good actor. And I think it's a really, really lovely performance. But that doesn't mean those two things always produce perfection. Yes, the devils. But that's an interesting idea. The idea that you basically put yourself onto a hard disk, and your body is used to fertilize the flowers, which is that's good and sensible recycling. So I think that what's nice is that you could put a very good case for what Monarch is up to. So they've had to add this thing that he's slightly mad and believes he's God. But I think, and the fact that he was quite calm about Nyssa being a threat to him, because she wasn't really a threat to him because he thinks he's God, so he doesn't fear things. But I think there needs to be something somewhere where there's fear or danger or somebody up to no good. I suppose Nyssa have... so right, here we go. That's what you want. This little me would have immediately perked up at this point. Somebody's got a laser gun. Somebody... This is the bit. Somebody brandishing a laser gun in Doctor Who should never be underestimated. It's the sort of thing I loved as a kid. Janet Fielding is working very, very hard there. I think her hands are working slightly better than her face. Oh, not for me. Oh, he's such a lovely character. He's really nicely written, actually. I think he is a really lovely... Well, he's a philosophical character, isn't he?
Might these be of any use to us? Not as they are. Perhaps I could alter their circuits.
Doctor, may I have your sonic screwdriver?
It's all rather polite, isn't it? Nobody's hiding. That's because of course they've set it up that the androids just have motor functions, so that they're obviously no threat to anybody.
Doctor, it's Tegan. She's trying to move the target.
And by the way, I've got concussion and need immediate medical attention. I love the way he does this. Paul Shelley is brilliant. He's only had about 4 lines this episode. This is the bit where... Because you don't really know what's going on at this point. And she's crying tears and everything, but the ship hasn't taken off. It now has taken off. But I don't know what Tegan's doing or saying there. I think I love this bit. Is it where he goes, decircuit that? Yeah, beautiful. And then takes a step to the side. It's wonderful acting by Paul Shelley there. Because he's pacing it right, he's doing the movements right, and he's bringing it to the end of the episode. And this, to me, was much more of an episode ending than the first 2, because it was my meat and drink. It's Doctor Who's going to have his head chopped off. That's what that's a much better episode. Now, I think I was going to say it's the worst of the episode endings, but actually I think it's made by mighty Paul Shelley's decircuit that and kill him, which I love. Everyone's getting a solo. Oh, poor old Annie Lambert and Bert Cook. Paul Shelley got a solo slide there. Oh, if there only had been space for one more, everybody could have had a solo caption there. I like it when people get a solo caption. Mickey Edwards, he was a visual effects assistant on many, but was designer on this one. Died a couple of years ago. His son sent me a couple of lovely photos. He looked like a character. He looked a bit like the actor, is it Peter Martin? Sort of Toby Jug sort of faced, cheery looking actor. So there we go, Tony Burrow. Oh yes, you'll probably have... Well, I don't know when I will have released the interview with him, but it's going to accompany this either during or after. Anyway, that was episode 3, a very talky installment of 4 to Doomsday. What can I choose? My favourite bit is when Paul Shelley says decircuit that and kill him. But James has already chosen enlightenment and persuasion, so he's not going to choose a moment from one of them. He's already chosen the design. The Monopticons. Monarch is great. Stratford-Johns is brilliant. Philip Locke is brilliant, but we can't just keep choosing people, can we? Well, I haven't chosen just people, have I? I've chosen the episode ending, and I've chosen the lighting. So do I choose philosophical Bygone? Do I choose Stratford-Johns' Monarch, who is a very good villain, and it is an effortlessly good performance? I think, even though I don't like Conquer Earth and by Zeus, I do like the, is Bygone dreaming of electric sheep? I do like the whole thing around Bygone, as that he is this massive circuits, but he retains his reason and his thoughtfulness and his philosophy, and the fact that episode is an enormous info dump. I think it's quite nice that it is being dumped in the tones of Philip Locke. Bygone? Do I say Bygone? I like that, all the Monopticons, which I do like. I do think they're pretty cool. The whole androidy, flesh-timey, Bygone-y thing, I think that's a dimension of the story that comes into the fore this episode, and I'm throwing a few things in there, hopefully one of which will be caught in James Goss's net as he chooses his favourite thing of episode 3.
My favourite thing about episode 3 is that we start to understand Monarch's plan. We realise that he believes he's God, because all the best Doctor Who villains believe they're God, and that they control human destiny, and that he has an entire vast spaceship full of androids who worship him. This is insane. This is wonderful. And he's a frog. He is a fruity frog. Congratulations, Doctor Who.
Brilliantly put, James, and better than what I came up with. And, you know, very true about that. That's certainly what happens, is that we do start to understand the plot, but only in the sense that everybody sits down and tells it us after 50 minutes of walking around a ship very slowly. So I think there are different ways of doing it, but I still kind of admire this slightly odd thing. So... And I certainly like listening to James talk about it, because he's witty and funny. And indeed, a frog who thinks he's God on a spaceship with some philosophical androids. Only in Doctor Who, eh? Well, do come and join me for episode 4 of 4 to Doomsday, which will be the very next release in this run of Happy Times and Places. But for the moment, from me, Toby Haydock, thank you very much, and goodbye. Well, welcome back, everybody. We're here for the final episode, episode 4 of 4 to Doomsday, in which Stratford Johns is a frog who thinks he's God, and Kato from the Pink Panther is underused, and Tegan has done something that has made her react in a very strange way to whatever's gone on in the TARDIS. Turns out she's, well, we will find out, but she's materialised outside the spaceship, but we had no idea that was the case. Really, what was going on last week, or last episode, because these were shown twice a week. Anyway, let's get on with it. Let's see what happens in the final episode of this very strange beast that they call 4 to Doomsday, which I'm going to press play on in 3, 2, 1. I've just poured myself a cup of tea in between episodes, and I've been pondering, and I don't know what this is. I'm as I say, I'm enjoying it, but partially because it's Doctor Who and it's so different from Doctor Who. But what was the motivation for making this story? What made Terence Dudley go, I want to tell a story about a guy on his way to an invasion who's got this curated methodology, and spends lots of time watching different Arts Council funded displays of movement. Wow, well done, Nissa, because she's used the graphite from the and I love the way that because it's so stagey, Paul Shelley has to do a kind of, I'm going to shoot you, I'm going to shoot you. No, actually, I'm going to shoot you. And it's really hokey, but he just makes it work because he's a good physical actor, and over just about sells and overcomes the technical flaws in the way that it has to be executed, and therefore the Doctor isn't executed. And I love this. You may keep the pencil. I love that line. I don't know why I love that line, but I love that line. It's it sums up this story as a whole. Is there's something rather curious and likeable and strange about what it does with something very ordinary. And surely that's what Doctor Who is all about. It's the, finding the Yeti at the loo and Tooting Bec. You may keep the pencil. I adore that line. And Shelley is selling this very nicely because he's polite, but he's oh God, another Chinaman reference, and that one's a joke. Oh dear. Anyway. And yeah, I do like the laser gun though. as I say, I was a sucker for that kind of thing. Oh, poor old Bygon's been decircuited. Decircuit that. So last time we saw Tegan, she was pulling a series of slightly bizarre faces, and she was either really upset or very happy, depending on how you interpret whatever it was that she was doing. And I think it's that she was slightly shocked that she'd managed to take off. But I would say it's not particularly clear. Now that's the line that James likes. The poor are always with us. But why does it come when he's looking outside the window at the TARDIS? It's like we've got a good line, but we don't quite know where to put it. Because when James mentioned that line in his summation of why he liked Enlightenment and Persuasion, it's a great line, the poor are always with us. But it's oddly placed there. Interfere with my I wouldn't dream of interfering your monopticus. See, that's a great Doctor Who-y line. It's very charming. John Black is a really interesting director because I think he's very elegant. He's quite stagey. You know, Keeper of Traken is very like a BBC Shakespeare production. And I wonder if he was cast to the stories that lent itself to that. But I did interview him, and he's a very nice man, a charming man, John. Oh no, there's going to be another dance. I mean, if you're going to have a story where lots of people have to sit and watch some entertainment, I can understand that the sword fights may be a bit diverting for the Saturday tea time audience, but the dances. Anyway, and John said he wasn't invited back after this, and he would have happily done more, which leads me to think that he was slightly hard done by, especially as Ron Jones keeps coming back, who I think is a very static director who does get better. But I don't think John Black does anything wrong. In fact, I think he kind of, he responds to the script in the best way possible. There's no disguising the fact that the script is a lot of exposition and a lot of walking about and a lot of watching dances. But I think he judges the tone of it very, very nicely. There's no point you can't make this action-packed. So I think his direction really suits the style. Oh, you're a dick, Adric. I'm so sorry, but he really is. Is there anybody that doesn't... is there anybody that... I mean, I know I'm got to accentuate the positive. And the positive is that, Matthew Waterhouse is, I think, hugely misunderstood, and I don't like the way that he's reported. I don't actually like the way he's treated, particularly on the commentaries for this, where I think it seems to me that the old dynamic that was existent during the production seems to sort of reassert itself, 30, 40 years later. Whereas Matthew is actually an interesting, funny guy. But I don't think there's any escaping that Adric is... I find Adric quite hard to like. Now, that may be good for the dynamic of the TARDIS, in that he... good leering from Paul Shelley here. He's a useful character in that he gets them into trouble. He's being well-meaning, but in being well-meaning, he sides with the wrong people and makes the wrong calls. Davison does this very, very well. This is another example of that. We're passing ourselves off in plain sight. And Davison does this very well. Shut up and listen. Very nice. He's got a great face, Paul Shelley. He's actually got a great face, and I don't mean this rudely. He's a very handsome man, but he's got a great face for a frog. Actually, Paul Shelley. I can see, there's the sort of the sense of the reptilian there, and he's great, isn't he? Because is he Provine in Blake 7 in the episode Countdown? He's very good at those sorts of you know, thin-faced villains. But he's had a terrific career, as I say, and latterly as a director of Shakespeare. But yeah, the idea that Adric is naive and causes trouble, I think is a good one, but I think they needed to characterize it slightly differently. It was, yeah. I always liked it when Nissa had something to do when I was younger. She was definitely, me as an 8-year-old, was my companion figure that I sided with. So I remember really liking the fact that it was her that used science to, what was it, conduct the sonic screwdriver through the graphite of the pencil, or whatever it was that she did. I loved that idea that Nissa was, you know, being proactive and being part of it. Some more dancing, hooray! Oh God, there's a bit later, isn't it, where everybody comes to dance at once. It's like, well, it's episode 4. I mean, what the audience are really gonna be singing out for is for the dancing to go a bit crazy. Yeah, there are some odd choices. It's an odd old thing, but I can't dislike it. But it is like it's being made by people who don't know what Doctor Who is, and it's a funny one for your. You know, the show has relaunched with a new Doctor, and there was a story they didn't make, wasn't there? The John Flanagan and Andrew McCulloch project, Theta Sigma. No, it's not called that, but whatever it was called. Which as it wasn't made, and because you've got this, and you've got Black Orchid, they're all quite sort of elegant, but they're quite slow-moving stories. You know, they're not afraid of taking their time. It's not like which is why Earthshock was so welcome to me as a kid, because it's, you know, again, it's what I imagined science fiction was like. I like the fact here that Bert Kwok finally gets something to do, but it's that classic thing of it's what the Doctor does to the Master in Terror of the Autons, isn't it? After 4 episodes of assisting the Nestines in their evil plan, he goes, "Do you really believe them?" He goes, "Oh, actually, now that you've pointed it out, the thunderingly obvious has occurred to me." Yes, you see, it's nice to see Bert Kwok finally doing something, and Lin Futu getting a bit of, you know, clubbing together with the Doctor to start. You know, it's fomenting a revolution, isn't it? That's what the Doctor does best, is that he upsets the status quo by energizing and enabling the people who have been hitherto enslaved. And also he, you know, reintroduces humanity. They get Bygone back, don't they? They reintroduce humanity. The Doctor is very much an advocate of the flesh time and of individualism and you know, all the things that stop us from being robotic and machine-like and conformist. So to its core, it's a very Doctor Who-y idea. It's just, but conformity. There is no other freedom. Now, I did not know he was going to say that, but of course the Doctor is not conforming. And making it pretty obvious to the viewer, if not to Monarch. There's still quite a lot to happen in this episode, because he's got to get the spaceship back. It's a beautiful Chinese dragon, but again, we're in episode 4, and the Doctor's watching essentially a carnival. But it's fun that he's used the dance to smuggle himself and Bygone out of there. And you've got another dance here, another fight. This is quite dull. What a funny story this is. I'm interested, but yeah, I don't think anyone loves 4 to Doomsday, but I hope that nobody hates it, because it's interesting as much as for as I say, some of the questions that I've raised as to how did this get to the point. It's this, and I wonder what Peter Davison thought. Going, is this? Oh, I remember the key. I remember the Keys of Marinus and the 10th Planet. They didn't do this. And why are Bygone and Enlightenment of Persuasion watching two men unconvincingly wrestle? Why aren't they going, should we be watching Line of Duty? Should we be binging? Should we Netflix and chill, Your Majesty?
Patch 9 is nearest. You will need life support and protective cover.
We have this.
Oh, no, that won't do for the temperature out there. Anyway, I'll need your help.
Yes, I like this costume as well. I think the costuming in this period of the show's history is superb, actually. I actually think season 18, 19 have really good costuming policy. The costumes are always well made. They're always elegant. I think Adric looks great in that sort of space safety costume thing that he's got on. Now, Princess Villagra is an actress called Nadia Hammam, and she gets a credit because it's a performance, even though her character has taken a vow of silence. But I don't know much about her, but I guess I've not really looked too hard, which is odd because I've searched in great, I've dug deep to find a Thal. I think it's partially also because I think if they're from further away in time, that to me feels more like archaeology, and this feels to me modern, even though it's 40 years old. So yeah, somebody born after me can find all this. I mean, I just think this is really funny. Not because it's badly done. It's obviously well choreographed, and the costumes are all great, and and incongruity in Doctor Who is good. A kid with a gas mask saying, "Are you my mummy?" is scarily incongruous. The TARDIS against an alien vista or a gleaming spaceship backdrop, that ramshackle blue box, that incongruity is charming and fascinating. But the incongruity of those different dances, sort of milling about that set with that repetitive, the didgeridoo music that keeps kicking in. Why is this? And I remember this being quite painful as a kid, because isn't it funny? Because I think it actually looks okay now, but I was always on the lookout for bad special effects, and CSO terrified me because it was the sort of thing that people at school, you could take the piss out of, and you could spot. I love the laser gun, and it goes through Adric, doesn't it? Because it goes through Persuasion, and he's great because he dust himself down. Yeah, brilliant. Before advancing, because he's not in a hurry, because he's a roboty thing. So Paul Shelley, I think, has been absolutely brilliant throughout, despite the limitations of the part. And I love that bit with the laser beam going through him and the way that he dusts his hand. But so the Doctor, and they get stuck, don't they, in a particular stance. So and that works really well, because so basically that's poor old Persuasion has been flung out into space, and I think that is nicely weird. They know that looks strange, the idea that he's stuck in that position because he's been decircuited, but I think that really works. I think that's really interesting. I think this has maybe been tarted up for the remastering, because I remember the rope disappearing quite a lot, and it just being a bit. Another great. I love a laser beam. I do love a laser beam. Oh, and I think she rather brilliantly, the way she undoes the rope and sort of rather callously. No, she actually does it quite jollily, doesn't she? Yeah, look at that look that she gives it. It's just to go, ha ha, I don't care, I'm throwing you away, and she gives him a little wave. That's quite arch and camp. I like that. Well done, Annie Lambert. Well done, enlightenment. You saucy minx. Now I remember. I think she had a. The last I saw of her, she was selling her gorgeous converted farmhouse for £1 million or something. In the somewhere. And that she'd retired from acting, and she'd come out and she'd done an episode of Midsummer Murders or something in about 2007, but it said she'd come out of retirement to do that. But seems happy enough anyway. I think she's done some Phantom Film signings as well. But yeah, she'd given up acting and made a beautiful home for herself. Good for her. Now this made sense to me. Oh yeah, I don't like the obviously the cricket ball is a drawing or a video effect or whatever. Now I'm told that the science of that is nonsense. That's interesting. I remember him having to do it far more times than that. Yes, well done, everybody. That silent, cheery acting. I'd remembered him having to do that a few times, the throwing the ball, which again, it was a kind of, brothers and sisters going, oh, that looks awful. And it was a real embarrassing moment. I remember when I, got it again on video going, oh, I remember this story being a bit boring and remembered those bits, those sort of bad bits of production being really set your teeth on edge. But actually, with the passage of time and all old Doctor Who sort of starting to look as each story is much like the other because it's the style of television is now, not how we do it. That sequence didn't look anything like as bad as I thought it would. And the science makes the momentum of him catching the ball and sending him flying back. I'm sure I read somewhere that that's absolute nonsense. But you know what? It makes perfect sense to me within the idea of weightlessness and the vacuum and whatever. I buy that. I quite like it. Yes, now is Stratford Johns giving a slightly different performance here again because this is a different production block. I think this is something worth looking out for if you remember what I was talking about in episode 1.
It's in pieces, but assemble it quickly.
Doctor, what about you?
I can go into a drug which reduces the need for oxygen.
Oh yes, which is something that we've seen the Doctor do before, respiratory bypass system and all of that, which is always a nice little. It's a nice moment for a fan. I remember being quite pleased as a kid knowing that yes, he can do that. All I have to do is I think it's never a great idea for a story as it's reaching its climax go. Yeah, all I have to do is sit down for a bit. Very good urgent acting there, Davison. I'd totally forgotten about this bit, but what are they do? I'm watching the two guys sort of half wrestling. I just find those dances so funny. Not because of the anyway. Ilario Bissi Pedro, who plays Kakooch, was in one of the League of Gentlemen's series 3, I think. I remember, and then died not long afterwards. Oh yes, because of course that's the big irony, isn't it? Is that actually Monarch has not had the courage of his own convictions. So there's a politician / leader saying, "Do as I say, but not as I do." Isn't that still relevant, listeners? Considering the times that we live in, presumably the first thing he does when he lands on Earth is to have a flesh time party in Downing Street. Yo, Doctor! You see, yeah, he's doing a bit of villainous acting there. That's a great special effect, the shrinking. He needs the atmosphere, yeah, because he's still he's still in the flesh time. Yeah. Cheeky, cheeky, cheeky. But it's a poison that shrinks people. So yeah, I don't know why the poison shrinks people. Was that he wasn't? I do like the idea that these four guys and their dancing robots go to another planet. And if Monarch is still alive in there, that banging on the helmet, because they say you shouldn't bang on a fish tank, would have probably perforated his tiny eardrums. Oh, it's a very sweet look that Lin Futu and Bygone exchange. So yeah, I mean, I do think it's sweet that those guys are going on to another place. Oh, and so it's a very abrupt ending, isn't it? With basically the Doctor having the vial of the poison and just basically saying to Monarch, look, I've made everybody dance, and I've frozen enlightenment and persuasion. So Monarch just comes and goes, I've got a laser gun, and he goes, I've got this thing, Shrinky. It's quite having spent a lot of time sitting around watching people dancing, it's, yeah, what a funny thing. And then it ends with a cliffhanger with Nyssa fainting. Has she been infected by the poison? Is her flesh time about to come to an end? No, she's the next episode cannot function with too many companions, so she's sent to sleep to make way for Richard Todd and Nerys Hughes and Simon Rouse in Kinder, which I've already done with the writer of The Bay, Dara Carville. That's been an earlier happy time and place. So if you're a late comer to this, do check some of the earlier episodes. Kinder was one I went off on one, I think, about the dark places of the inside. But that's the nature of these. These are unrehearsed. I don't do any homework beforehand, because that's what the deep dive, too much information's are for. And I do a bit of homework for the indefinable magic, but they're written, they're scripted, every line thought about. Whereas this is my reaction to the episodes, but trying to find the positives. And I have to find two, because I have to find a favourite thing about episode 4. And I also have to find an overall favourite thing. And I'm probably not going to win, but I never do. But I was close with episode 1 with James. I've chosen Don Babbage's lighting when James chose the corridors. In the second episode, I chose the cliffhanger when James chose enlightenment and persuasion. So I can't choose what he's already chosen. For episode 3, I chose the sort of bygone philosophical, flesh time kind of stuff, whereas James chose Monarch's plan. There's a little bit of crossover there, but perhaps not quite as much. I was a bit nebulous with episode 3, let's be honest. I was a bit strange and hard to decipher, which is, I think, in keeping with the story. And for episode 4, I'm going to choose I Love, You May Keep the Pencil. I'm sorry, I don't care. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, and I'm not entirely sure why. But it's a mixture of, and I like to give a nod to Paul Shelley, because he's a fine actor and jolly chat, nice man. And I think overall, I have to give Stratford-Johns due for, I think, pitching his performance very well across the whole of the 4 episodes, and doing good villainous acting, but without going through the motions. It's not villainous acting by numbers. As I say, he brings a certain casualness to it whilst having a grandiosity, which is difficult, because that sounds like that sounds like an oxymoron. But he wears his majesty. It's because he has an innate presence, and he's really good at delivering dialogue and making it hit home. So well done, Stratford-Johns. I think it's a really good performance. His real name was Alan Stratford-Johns, and one of the first of the Z cars alumni that John Nathan Turner, I think, basically when when somebody goes into a meeting, goes, so what could you bring to this job? How do you see yourself? What do you see yourself doing with Doctor Who? And I think John Nathan Turner said basically, giving roles to the entire cast of the Pallisers and Z-Cars. That was pretty high on his aims for the show. So what has James chosen for episode 4 and for his bonus thing?
My favourite thing about episode 4, and it's not even going to be a surprise to you or anyone, is that it is the little programme that could. Perhaps it shouldn't, but it did. That spacewalk, only Doctor Who would have attempted a scene like that. Only Doctor Who would have attempted it with an office chair and some black drapes. Only Doctor Who would have pulled it off. Bugger off, Star Trek. Any other show, whatever. Just look at that. Look at the fact that it flies in the face of budgets, in physics, in everything, and it just goes for it. Congratulations. And my final bonus joy of 4 to Doomsday is the idea of this mad spaceship full of robots who are flying around for all eternity worshipping a frog. Only Doctor Who could do this idea. It's just so delightful and fun, and is the kind of idea that Doctor Who should be doing. And I hope you've enjoyed 4 to Doomsday as much as you should. And if you haven't, that's your fault and not 4 to Doomsday's.
Oh, thanks, James. I do urge you to seek out his work if you haven't already. He will need no introduction to any of you, but his personality shines through his work. He's a delightful fellow. He's screamingly intelligent, searingly intelligent, and terribly, terribly funny, which he wears very lightly as a person. And he's also very charming, and he's been very helpful to me as well. I like him a lot, even though I don't know him especially well. And I really do like his work, and I would urge you to seek out any writing of his that you can find. He's really one of Doctor Who's good guys. And I'm delighted he chose 4 to Doomsday. And he's right. And do you know what? That spacewalk would be a thing that I would have ashamed me so much as a kid. I remember at the time going, oh, God. And actually looking at it now, it looks absolutely fine. And forgotten, yes, it's an office chair. That's how he goes back. He sort of flies back because he's sitting on an office chair. Brilliant. Good for you. Everyone else at the BBC is making stuff set in, in living rooms and police offices, police stations, or rooms. Doctor Who is doing space, and trying to, and the fact that also it uses the cricket ball that they've gone with. I don't particularly approve of a costume, of the Doctor having a costume, and especially one that is a motif, i.e. he likes cricket, so therefore he will always wear a cricket. That's like saying I like Doctor Who, I will always dress as Doctor Who, or somebody's a football fan, they will always wear their football scarf. No, you don't. People don't do that. But nonetheless, if you're gonna do that, if you're gonna go, well, he's the cricket guy, then I think it is. It is smart and delightful and artful to go, okay, well, how's he going to get out of this? Oh, well, he's going to use the cricket ball that he always carries. We may as well make use of the fact that he's got the cricket ball. So I actually, that whole sequence now that doesn't look, okay, it probably looks slightly below average in terms of special effects of 1980s Doctor Who, but all special effects in 1980s Doctor Who do not hold a candle to special effects today. So then, as I say, they all sort of merge into one, really. And I'd expected to hate that. I think it has been slightly improved by the remastering that we know has gone on for various subsequent re-releases, and I think BritBox gets the masters for the DVDs or the Blu-rays or whatever. So it looks slightly better than it did at the time, but that's okay. I enjoyed that sequence much more. Well, it certainly didn't embarrass me in the way that I thought it would. And I agree with James. It is a story. It's a mad story. It's weird. I've got no idea what anybody was thinking. But I kind of like, that's what I kind of like about Doctor Who. You know, television is full of things where, you know, and often television in those days was made, as Terrence Dicks said, you know, we just didn't want to show the test card. You had to get the stuff out there. It was made, you know, in a very tight window, and the show had to go on, and it was made in a certain way that you just wouldn't do a show like that, certainly. Now, and even doing it then, doing it the way that you make other programs that aren't set in space, and having to get something out by a certain time. But even within that slight madness, you have this really strange fish of a story that somebody wanted to tell. And within it, there are moments of great charm. There are moments of great strangeness. There are bits I simply don't understand. And I've watched it a lot. As I say, that I don't understand in terms of the story, but also I don't understand in terms of going, what? Because you sweat over every sentence, over every full stop when you're producing a piece of work. And I don't know if the sweat sort of blurred the page and people said, well, we'll just guess what this is supposed to be. I've no idea. But I was charmed by that. I very much enjoyed it. I very much enjoyed James's enjoyment of it. I hope you have enjoyed it. My thanks to James. My thanks to you for listening. We've got to the end of the podcast, so I'm going to go back to the beginning and start editing it together. And maybe when I go back to the beginning, I will meet myself and prove that I am God. Thanks very much for listening. I will speak to you on the next one of these. Goodbye.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
Well, I'm coming back to this podcast before it signs off sometime later to just do a couple of additions to save you writing or tweeting in. This is the section we called I Think You'll Find, where something I've mused about and not come up with an answer to has been answered by fair means or foul. And this is definitely fair because Peter Ware, deputy editor of Doctor Who magazine, who is a patron, so he gets these podcasts before you do if you're listening to this and you're not a patron. Well, yeah, you won't be because the patrons have actually not had this bit. That's interesting, unless they then listen to it when it comes. It doesn't matter. Because so that actually means you've got something that the people that pay for these podcasts haven't got. That seems wrong. I'm going to have to address that. Anyway, Peter says, 1, did you know that 4 to Doomsday, I said I didn't even know what the title meant. 4 to Doomsday is so called because that was the position the Doomsday clock was at in 1982. And Peter says we're currently at 100 seconds to midnight. Yikes! So isn't that interesting? 4 to Doomsday is so called because it's the position of the Doomsday clock in 1982. Great title. Thanks, Terence Dudley. No way I could have discerned that. Well, I didn't. I mean, I haven't for however many years it is, 40 years, until Peter listened to this and told me. So he's told me I've learnt something I didn't know, and I hope some of you had. If you were all throwing things at your radio or your headphones or whatever you listen to on, going, that was what the time means, you idiot, then perhaps I should retire and you can all do the podcast for me. And I was musing about where the Chinese extras came from and said I was pretty certain they'd come from a local Chinese restaurant, or I'd read that at the time. Peter says it's likely that Chinese extras in the story were recruited via Peggy Sir's Oriental casting agency, which also engaged me, that's Peter, to appear in the Madonna film Shanghai Surprise in the mid-1980s, because Peter, his great-auntie Vi was in Marco Polo, and his great-uncle Frederick, Vi's husband, was in The Talons of Weng Chiang. But Peter says the Chinese extras in 4 to Doomsday, it's entirely possible that Peggy Sir's agency did cast them all from the same restaurant. So it was Peggy Sir who you went to if you wanted authenticity in your, to use the phraseology du jour, and to use the title of the casting agency if you wanted oriental casting in your production. And Peggy Sir is actually herself an extra in Marco Polo. But that's a story for another day. So there you are, clearing up a few things that may have had you either unsatisfied because I didn't reach a proper conclusion or left it hanging, or throwing things at the speaker going, hang on, Toby, I know that. Well, I'm just showing you that I know that now too. Thanks to Peter Ware. What a gentleman. Thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest was James Goss, who could be found on Twitter at GossJam. I'm grateful to James and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Stephen Moffat, Paul Greaves, Peter Burns, James Curray-Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, David Trainier, Tim Arding, David, Nigel Bromley, Jenny at Blue Box 99, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Grant Davidson, John Deere, Chris Junford-Kelk, Paul Dunn, Jason Gorman, Simon Galichon, Chris Hyam, Ian Key, Joe Llewellyn, Philip Marsh, Nathan Martin, Roland Moore, Kevin Murdoch, Graham Knott, Adam Parker, Barry Platt, Risto, Matty Sarillo, and Frank Shales. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like your name to be one of those lovely names read out at the end, then you can go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock. Having your name read out is just one of the things that you get for bestowing some of your hard-earned money in the direction of my Patreon page, where you also get bonus releases, extra material, monthly AMAs, bits from my archive, and photos of my dog. Patreon.com/Toby Haydock, or you can do the Ko-fi model, which is kofi.com/Toby Haydock. I'm on Twitter at Toby Haydock. These podcasts are at Haydock Podcasts. I'm on Instagram at Toby.Haydock, and you can find me on Facebook too. Those two music clues were very closely placed together. They were cut and pasted from the original sort of layout of episode 4 as I'd done it, and I didn't find I'd given myself much to say at all. Maybe I decided I'd said way too much. I give myself much longer to say things like, come to the Patreon, and if you can't give these things a 5-star review, please give them a 5-star review. Reviews have stalled. If you haven't reviewed this and rated it, couple of lines review and 5 stars on iTunes, Spotify, blah, blah, blah. All of those really do help to polish the algorithms. That's what I would have said in the middle. See, those short music cues didn't work, did they? Because I've just put them afterwards in the bit that's usually a bit of bonus meandering that I don't know why I do. I think it originally started, it was just like, one line. I just say something apposite and pithy, and off I'd pop. It's just a nice little, like the Marvel films, just a nice little bit at the end. Not like the Marvel films where it's like, bits of a film shot professionally by a major film director with proper posh actors in it. But, the principle is the same. Just a little bit of toodle pip in entertainment form, or not even entertainment, but you know what I mean. But they've become this, which is a sort of, off the cuff mental meander given voice, to the satisfaction, I suspect, of nobody. Anyway, what I did notice when I was putting this omnibus together, because what I could do, you see, is just cut and paste the post-credit stuff from episode 4, but I make it special for the people that have listened to the omnibus, that they don't get the same. So, of course, if you're a completist, I'm sure there's not a completist out there, but if you were, say there was an archive of my oeuvre, people would go, well, you've got to have the original 4 episodes and the omnibus, because the omnibus actually has a different post-credit stuff. It has different credits, actually. I re-record the opening and the closing credits. I don't know why. It would be easier not to. I would not be now up at 26 minutes past midnight when I've got loads of things to do tomorrow doing this. So why am I even complaining? I'm not complaining to you. You don't make me do it. This is my fault. Anyway, the thing that I've noticed is, as this podcast clocks in at 2 hours and 20 minutes almost, so I don't think you need anything else. But, of course, James Goss, since this was recorded, and, since he sent in his submission, which was much earlier than that, because it's obviously a bit of a delay, he has written a thing called Doomsday, which is coming out, as I record this, is coming out right now, featuring an old colleague of mine, not an old, a current colleague of mine, somebody from the comedy circuit with whom I worked during lockdown on my stand-up shows online and on Dick Dixon in the 21st century, I don't even know what it's called, and I directed it. The lovely Dick Dixon thing that I did with Johnny Morris and Kieran Hodgson. Suze was in that, and brilliant she is too, because she's a brilliant voice performer. Is called Doomsday, written by James Goss, starring Suze Kempner, and that's all sort of happened since James recorded his bit there, and now it's out there, and it's called Doomsday, and it's one of the lead-ins to a new series of Doctor Who, supervised, overseen, written by, and executive produced and showrun by Russell T Davies, with a brand new Doctor, and Bonnie Langford's come back, and am I actually awake at 27 minutes past midnight, or is everything just a strange dream? It's very exciting though, isn't it? Anyway, that was that. This is me. I'm going to keep doing that because that's all I could think of, really. And yeah, how exciting. But yes, go and check out James's Doomsday. That's exciting.